I remember the exact smell of the restaurant the night everything changed. Rain on hot asphalt, the oily sweetness of candle-scorched steak, and the faint antiseptic tang of a restroom I'd visit later. It was a Thursday, nothing special on the calendar, a thin, ordinary line of time I thought I could trust. Emma laughed across the table, the kind of laugh that had once been my whole map for where to steer my days. She had on that blue dress I'd bought her for our 3rd anniversary. It hugged the curve of her shoulder like it belonged there. She reached for my hand, squeezed, and for a minute I let myself believe in small mercies, that despite the late nights, the hushed messages, the silences that had become rooms of their own, we were still tethered. 2 weeks later I found a receipt in the pocket of my coat for a dry cleaners I didn't recognize, dated 3 days before. I told myself I'd take it up with her calmly. I was naively still practicing calm like a muscle I wanted to strengthen. The first sign that something was wrong was a casualness on her part, an ease in answering calls I couldn't remember ever seeing before. She stopped asking about my day. She began to linger in the shower. When I mentioned it, she smiled, the kind of smile that said she understood my jealousy, yet had no intention of bowing to it. I told myself I didn't want to be that man who pinned his love with surveillance. I wanted trust. I wanted to be the husband who trusted. So I let the nagging sit like a lint ball in my mind, and pushed it into the coat pocket I carried through the rest of my life. There were nights when the apartment felt like an old photograph, all familiarity and no depth, colors flattened by distance. I'd come home to find the bedroom window slightly ajar, the bed made as if to say whoever slept there last respected the contours of the sheets. One morning I went to make coffee and found a lipstick-stained wine glass in the sink. The lipstick was the exact shade Emma wore when she wanted attention. She could have explained, but she walked in with her hair tied up, kissed me on the cheek, and said she had to go to work. Her voice flitted off my questions as if they were dust. A rational part of me still whispered that maybe I was imagining the betrayal, stress, paranoia. The human mind is a factory of stories. But a different part of me, the stubborn dismantler, began to pay attention. I started to notice patterns. How certain contacts made her eyes light up, how she checked her phone when I walked into a room and then set it face down. The snooping felt like petrified fear. I hated it, and yet I kept going back to it because fear, when held, gives you a tool. I wanted the truth more than I wanted to be right. I found the rest by accident. I was sorting through the basement boxes, old photo albums and a high school trophy I'd been too embarrassed to display, and I discovered a small, nondescript hard drive tucked inside an old camera case. It was something I hadn't owned. There was a tremor in my hand when I plugged it into my laptop. Maybe I expected cat videos, the banal nonsense that always leaves you shaking your head. Instead, what loaded were hundreds of files. Photos, snippets of video, recordings. A timeline of moments that had nothing to do with the life I thought Emma and I had built together. Part of me wanted to smash the drive underfoot, to erase the evidence and pretend ignorance. I couldn't. Instead, I watched. I created a private folder and dragged the files in like someone building a shrine to pain. There were photos of Emma in the blue dress leaning into a man at a party, a quick bright flash of intimacy that could be explained as a dance, or a friendly kiss on the cheek. Then there were the videos, short, grainy clips at first. Them walking down a street, sharing a cigarette, the camera staying far enough away to give them privacy, but close enough that their laughter bubbled through the recording like a contaminant. And then there was a longer file labeled Back Alley November 12th, that made my stomach sink to a place I hadn't known existed. They were kissing. Not a tender brush but a collision. It was awkward and fierce and the kind of betrayal that looks exactly like hunger. Emma's hands were in his hair. His hands were on her waist. The camera had tracked them as the man. Daniel, I would later learn his name, pulled her toward the dumpster behind some restaurant, and away from the eyes that might have judged them. The clip lasted less than a minute, but it rewired my world. I could hear in my head the sounds from the recording. The scrape of shoes on wet concrete, the desperate hush of breath, the wet click of a latch. For the first time since childhood, I felt emptied out, as if someone had undermined the floorboards under me. I did what any reasonable man might do in the electric fog of discovery. I called Emma. Her voice was warm, a current I'd once loved to swim in. When I asked where she'd been the previous night, she said, "Out with colleagues." in a tone that tasted of practiced normality. I kept my voice even. I told her about the receipts, the unusual messages I'd seen, the lipstick glass. She sighed. Look, can we talk tonight? I'm tired. There was a slight shame line at the corner of her mouth, but not contrition. That night I sat on the sofa with the drive like a live coal against my palm. Part of me wanted to confront her with the video, to watch the way her face drained and maybe, in that moment of honesty, find an exit or a stitch. Instead I did something more calculated. I copied the file and tested different formats. I played with playback speed, edited audio, enhanced pixels. I am not a tech genius, but I am methodical, and I can learn. I learned how to cleanly extract audio, how to scrub out background noise until the kiss, that single shattering sound, stood like a bell in the middle of a forest. Days became a rehearsed machine. I would go to work suit and tie, and wear a practice smile while I kept that bell ringing in my ear. I would come home and put on music loudly to cover the hum of the apartment. I never once let Emma catch me watching her. I began to imagine the confrontation like a chess game. If I acted impulsively and made the mistake of begging, I would lose. If I revealed everything at the wrong moment, she might fold me into apology and disaster. I wanted not just the truth, but the absolute clarity of it, imprinted in people's minds. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. I think revenge is a brand, a performance art form that requires timing, architecture, and an audience. I wanted witnesses. Not for vanity, but because betrayal is often an invisible crime. It lives in the private cells of a household, and without evidence the accused can recreate themselves as a victim. I wanted to make sure there was nowhere for her to hide. That whichever story she told, the tape would speak against it like a judge. I considered public humiliation, subtle exposure at a family gathering, a message to friends. But I wanted control, spectacle, a place where all the right people would be at once. A wedding, perhaps, or a gallery launch where mutual acquaintances would congregate. Those ideas drifted and died against a practical need. The tape had to be clear, undeniable, and play to people who mattered to us both. And so I chose a venue we knew. The cafe where we'd had our first date, a place with retro speakers and a projector used for open mic nights. We had both loved that cafe for its small, honest light. I booked the space for a slide night. I proposed to the owner under the pretense of showing travel photos to a small crowd I'd invited. The owner, who knew me as a regular, agreed. He did not ask many questions because the economy of small coffee houses is trusting and hungry. Invitations were tricky. I couldn't invite everyone, that would tip her off. But I could invite the circle that mattered. Mutual friends, a couple she had been close to in college, my sister, her sister-in-law, and a few colleagues. I made the invites casual, almost jovial. Come see some old travel slides, pizza and drinks Friday at 7. Emma, when I suggested a quiet night out, agreed. She liked the idea of revisiting the place where we had begun, perhaps to relight something. I tried to meet her eyes when she stepped into the blue dress I'd first fallen in love with. I wanted to see whether she would notice the tremor in my jaw. She did not. On Friday the cafe hummed with people arranged like a constellation. Couples, a man with a laptop, a woman knitting. The owner dimmed the lights and set up the projector as the coffee-scented room settled into an expectant hush. I stood at the front with a glass of cheap wine, and the drive on a USB stick. My heart was a machine of cold iron. Emma sat a few rows back, unaware. Daniel was not there. He didn't need to be. His absence, I supposed, allowed for an even purer form of exposure. I began with travel photos, sunsets, a train station in Prague, a drunk elephant in Thailand. I told jokes, the easy kind that invited people to listen, to relax. I poured the wine, and kept my voice steady. After the last of the slides, the mood shifted. People took their final sips, thinking the night was winding down. That was the moment I had chosen. I clicked the file. At first, nothing. The projector complained with faint static. Then the screen filled with an image. Emma and Daniel in the doorway of a dim club. The timestamp in the corner a small, impassive witness. A murmur rose like a question. I could feel Emma's presence like a current behind me, like someone breathing down my neck. I pressed play, and the room fell into a vacuum. The audio came through the cafe speakers. Breath, a scrape of denim, and then the kiss. The sound was small and private, and then monstrous in its scale as it amplified into the room. Gasps, a low hiss of disbelief. Emma's face in the dim light did something I had never seen it do. It shrank away from me, not in shame but in the cold recognition of being caught. She touched her lips as if trying to press the memory back into whatever soft place it had come from. Someone laughed nervously, a sound that was both absurd and desperate. I watched faces flicker. My sister's mouth forming a question, our mutual friend Lucy's eyes dampening, a colleague's jaw loosening into disgust. I felt a power I didn't recognize, a terrible, clean certainty. I had expected all sorts of reactions, anger, betrayal, pity. But the sensation of seeing my marriage reconstitute in real time across other people's expressions was its own breed of clarity. Emma stood up and the chair scraped like an accusing finger. "Michael," she started. Her voice was thin, an exposed wire. I had rehearsed the scene in my head 1,000 times. Part of me wanted to let her speak, to let her shame talk its way into apology. But what I wanted more was to give everyone the evidence without the complicating veneer of her voice. I pressed a button and another clip played. Minutes of text messages imported as screenshots, the evidence of a relationship that had been carefully archived in pixels. I had not lived out of spite. I had been methodical, pulling together the thesis I needed to prove what my gut already knew. Silence became the room's new furniture. My sister's hand found mine. She squeezed in confusion and anger. Emma's face had the washed-out look of someone who had stepped out of a dream into the wrong day. "You set me up," she said then, brandishing the phrase like a shield. "You planted this." It was an accusation that pretended to innocence. I let people see the chain of messages where she had told Daniel about our plans, where she had laughed at a joke I hadn't heard. A friend called out, "Why would you do that?" And I heard something like a sad recalibration click behind my eyes. My voice when I finally spoke was small. "Because," I said, "the truth shouldn't be something that hides in trash bins and hard drives. Because some things are better viewed with witnesses." The words were honest and terrible. Emma's defense faltered. She raised her hands as if warding off a storm and then, like someone who had realized too late that the weather had changed, turned to leave. People parted for her in the cramped room, an invisible current making way. I had time to see the shape of her shoulders, the set of her jaw, and something in her eyes that may have been regret or may have been the cold calculation of someone who had long planned for contingencies. She stumbled toward the door, then paused, then walked out into the rain with an umbrella someone grabbed from the cafe's rack. The night swallowed her up in a sheen of streetlight and moving cars. A friend ran after her but returned shaking his head, saying she'd told him not to follow. After she left the cafe, conversation clustered into quiet islands of speculation and sympathy. People wanted to know if we were splitting up. They wanted to offer their condolences. I felt oddly detached, like a man watching a movie about himself. I answered questions with a flatness that suggested I had been relieved of something heavy. Relief is not the same as victory. Victory tasted like ash. Victory is a glass you wash and find nothing inside but the fingerprints of your own mistakes. The next week was a hurricane of small, practical things. Emma moved out, quietly, taking only what could fit in a small car. She left a note, a folded, perfunctory piece of paper that said, "I'm sorry." It was not the apology I wanted. It was not the confession I had imagined. It was, instead, a thing that fit easily into my palm, and then dissolved in my pocket like lint. She called my phone once, and I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a whisper of regret that tried to sound like an explanation and failed. I didn't return the call. News traveled in social gravity. Mutual friends chose sides as if choosing a team. Some called me brave for exposing her. Others whispered that I had humiliated her, that there were lines I'd crossed. I did what I promised myself I wouldn't. I listened to what people said about me. Some said I was cruel. Some said I had done the right thing. The world is not a tidy place where justice conforms to your plans. There was a hearing months later, in which we divided the life we had made into cardboard boxes and numbers. Property, accounts, old investments cataloged like bones. I remember signing forms, the pens rusty with bureaucratic indifference. We were polite in person, more like actors following a script. We had once devised elaborate plans for vacations we never took, for Sunday mornings we would never share again. The weight of those abandoned plans hollowed my chest in a way I had not expected. Time, that terrible slow healer, began its work. It is not that I forgot. I had carved the night into my memory like a date carved into a tree. But the sharpness of the moment dulled. The bell that had rung in the cafe would, in time, be muffled by other noises. Work emails, bills, the quiet joy of a sunrise that had no agenda. I moved into a smaller apartment, a place with fewer ghosts. Friends drifted away, and others stepped in to fill the spaces they left. I learned again to breathe in rooms alone. I went on dates that were clumsy, like learning to ride a bicycle after you have forgotten how. The world looked different through new eyes, both wider and thinner in strange ways. Forgiveness, when it came, was not theatrical. It arrived like a soft, persistent tide, not of pardon for what happened, but a loosening of the knot that had kept me bound to the precise posture of revenge. I forgave myself first for letting the suspicion become an obsession. For the hours I had walled off to construct a public unmasking. I realized my act had been partly a plea for validation. I had wanted other people to acknowledge my pain because I feared I could not sustain it alone. Months after the cafe night, I ran into Emma in a bookstore. It was a small place with thick carpets and the muffled hush of pages moving like small sails. She was in the poetry section, fingers tracing the spines with a deliberation I recognized like a map. The moment our eyes met, there was an old script falling into place, the recognition of two people who had once been anchors for one another. We spoke in the soft voice the bookstore required. She looked thinner. There were small lines at the corner of her mouth that had not been there the year before. Her hair was shorter. She apologized again, this time in person, her words rawer, less practiced. She said the most human thing of all. I don't know why I did it. There was no explanation that would have made sense. There was sorrow. There was no demand for forgiveness, only a statement of fact, like someone admitting they had stolen a coat they wanted but could not afford. I surprised myself by saying, I don't think I needed to expose you to the whole world. It came out gentler than I had rehearsed. She nodded. I know, she said. I hated you for it, and then later I hated myself more. We spoke for a while, small talk that grew, like two people testing the depth of a pond by tossing pebbles. In the end, we did not resume the life we had, and I don't think either of us wanted to. We left the bookstore with pages between our fingers like small maps to places we had yet to visit. People remember the cafe night, and they remember the tape. On the anniversary of that Thursday, friends sometimes joke nervously that I went full exposé, as if my action were a spectacle they can reduce to a one-liner. I never correct them. Truth is a complicated thing. Sometimes it is necessary to shout it into the open. Other times the shouting is simply noise. A cautionary note that lives in me still. There is dignity even in the wronged. A dignity that revenge can strip away even while it vindicates. Watching her flee into the rain had been both triumph and cruelty. In the months that followed, I learned to live with the consequences of my decision as if with a scar. It hurt when touched, healed when left alone. I stopped recording other people's lives. I stopped cataloging moments for later weaponization. I rebuilt trust in myself and slowly in strangers. If someone asked me now whether I would do it again, expose the tape, play the kiss into the speakers of a small cafe, the answer would be complicated, layered with the knowledge that actions have ripples you cannot predict. I would say this. I did it because I could not bear a private denial, because the truth had become a ghost in the corner of my kitchen and ghosts were eating the light. I did not do it for malice but for clarity. I wanted witnesses because I needed the world to admit what I already knew in the dark. Emma and I live different lives now. She took up painting. Her canvases hang in modest galleries. She sends notes on holidays I used to make plans for, polite as postage stamps. Sometimes I see one of her paintings in an exhibit and think about the way color can reconstruct a person, the way brushstrokes can both hide and reveal. I have dated, clumsily, and loved cautiously. I have learned that love is not always a single arc of redemption. Sometimes it is an accumulation of small, careful decisions. The tape sits in a drawer in my desk. I have never deleted it. I keep it there because it is a part of my story the same way the ring she left behind is. An artifact of a life lived and remade. Sometimes I play it alone. Not to revel but to remind myself how close I came to letting a private wound rot in darkness. We are all messy, messy creatures. We do things out of hunger, out of fear, out of selfishness. We also do things out of bravado and love, and the need to be seen. The night I played the tape, the world watched. It watched because I invited it, because I wanted there to be witnesses to the end of what we were. In the end, I learned that watched or not, truth tends to have a gravity of its own. And gravity, like everything else, shapes the ways we fall and the ways we learn to stand again.